Hello everyone, I am David Milan and welcome to my channel FactUSA. Let's discover an amazing fact in every day.
Or how a completely everyday ingredient became this sacred, literally immortal substance in the ancient world. You probably have a jar of it sitting in your kitchen cabinet right now, completely unaware of the massive historical and religious weight it actually carries. So we're going to explore exactly how ancient cultures used honey, not just as a sweetener for their tea, but in some deeply profound religious ceremonies and absolutely vital royal traditions.
Think about this question for a second. Most things we consume, well, they decay, right? Fruit rots, meat spoils, bread gets moldy. The passage of time pretty much destroys every food source we have. But the source material for today reveals a food that literally defies time. We're talking about a substance that remains perfectly edible long after the civilization that harvested it has just crumbled into dust.
5,500. That is the age, in years, of some perfectly intact honey discovered by archaeologists in a noblewoman's burial site in Borjomi, Georgia. It was carefully placed in these sealed vessels specifically intended for her to consume in the afterlife. Just imagine that for a second. Honey harvested 3.5 millennia before the Roman Empire even existed, and it's still completely intact. No way, right? So how exactly did ancient people understand this miraculous preservation?
To answer that, here's what we'll be covering. First, Egypt, sun, power, and life. Second, Hatti and sweetening the gods. Third, Greece and rites of the underworld. And finally, the science of immortality.
So, starting with part 1, Egypt, sun, power, life, exploring the nectar of the pharaohs. We kick things off in Lower Egypt, where apiculture or beekeeping was just this massive, highly organized industry. Down there, honey wasn't just some crop, it was a total cornerstone of royal and religious identity. Actually, the bee itself was part of the royal pharaonic title, known as He of the Reed and Bee. And this quote, "The god Re wept, and the tears from his eyes fell to the ground and became a bee," comes from a creation myth in Papyrus Salt 825, dating back to around 300 BCE. It totally captures the foundation of that belief. You see, Egyptians directly linked honey to the primordial fertility of the ultimate deity, the sun god Re. So to consume or offer honey was to interact with the literal tears of the sun. It was about bringing divine light and life straight down to the earthly plane.
So the really crucial takeaway here is how this actually played out in their religious ceremonies and royal traditions. Ptolemaic kings would formally offer honey to Ithyphophalic or fertility gods like Min. Why? To assure their own earthly authority and secure agricultural bounty for the kingdom. Honey was also used in rituals to symbolically revive gods like Osiris in the afterlife. And of course, it was absolutely vital for human royalty too. I mean, we literally found 3,000-year-old jars of honey in King Tutankhamun's tomb, put there to secure his own safe passage into eternity.
But honey's power went way beyond just offerings. It actually functioned as incredibly potent magic in Egypt. Take this phrase, sweet to the people, but bitter to those there, meaning the dead. This comes from an ancient spell used specifically to protect children, using honey to actively ward off malevolent forces. Because it was the essence of life and the sun, honey was considered bitter or highly repellent to the dark entities of death. It was essentially a spiritual shield.
Moving on to part 2, Hatti sweetening the gods, coaxing deities and dispelling curses.
Let's head over to the Hurro-Hittite religion of ancient Anatolia, or Hatti. Now here we see a huge shift from that grand Egyptian reverence to something entirely different, and honestly incredibly pragmatic. For the Hittites, honey wasn't this absolute symbol of the sun, it was a super practical tool used in these really complex religious ceremonies for magical appeasement. Check out these steps from the Hittite evocation ritual. When their deities, like the cedar gods, vanished in anger and brought devastation to the land, the celebrants didn't just sit around and pray, they laid bait. They would actually draw physical trails made of honey mixed with fine oil and wine, leading all the way out of the mountains and rivers. They were hoping to literally tempt these missing gods back to their temples, where they would then pour honey right at the statue's feet to satisfy them.
Notice the stark contrast here. While Egypt worshipped honey as the divine tears of the sun, something intrinsically linked to absolute royal power, the Hittites were way more practical about it. In Hatti, it was a pragmatic sweetener. They'd combine it with things like a black lamb or virgin olive oil to reverse curses, or to literally sweeten the sour disposition of a disgruntled god like Telipinu. It wasn't about worshipping the honey itself, it was, highly functional ritualistic bribery.
And that brings us to part 3, Greece, rites of the underworld, dark rituals and bloodless sacrifices. Now we pivot to classical Greece, where the tone shifts dramatically. We are moving far away from the sunny, life-giving skies of Egypt and descending straight into the darkness of the earth. The Greek application of honey in religious ceremonies is, frankly, probably the most surprising of all. It's fascinating how the Greeks stripped honey away from the bright, sky-dwelling Olympian gods, like Zeus or Athena in their normal guises, and reserved it almost exclusively for abnormal, chthonic rites. In ancient Greece, if you were pouring honey, you were almost certainly dealing with ghosts, heroes, or the terrifying deities of the underworld.
Which brings us to a very specific type of religious ceremony known as the Nymphalia. These were wineless libations. You see, in a normal Greek sacrifice to the Olympians, you poured wine, but for the dead and the underworld gods, wine was strictly forbidden. Instead, they offered these Nymphalia, mixtures of honey, milk, water, and oil. These specific ingredients were viewed as the exact opposite of normal offerings. They echoed this pure, archaic, golden age past from a time before agriculture and wine even existed.
And this practice of underworld offerings was incredibly widespread in Greek mythology and ritual. Just think of Homer's Odyssey, where Odysseus literally digs a pit and pours a honey mixture to safely summon the ghost of the seer Tiresias. Or how honey was offered to Demeter the Black when she was mourning the abduction of her daughter into the underworld. Even real-life initiates at the Oracle of Trophonius had to physically clutch barley cakes kneaded with honey as they slid backward into an underground cave to receive prophecies. Basically, honey was the ultimate key to unlocking the Greek underworld.
All right, moving into part 4, the science of immortality. Why honey never spoils.
Okay, let's dive into the chemistry of all this. These ancient civilizations, from the pharaohs down to the Greek oracles, built these vast religious traditions around honey because they recognized it as an immortal substance. Now, we're going to reveal exactly why they were right, purely from a scientific perspective. And it all starts with water, or actually the lack of it. When a worker bee collects nectar from a flower, that nectar is up to 70% water. But when they bring it back to the hive, the house bees spend days furiously fanning the honeycomb with their wings. This deliberate airflow evaporates the water right out of the nectar, driving the water content way down to just 17%, creating this incredibly supersaturated sugar solution.
The really key concept here is something called water activity. This is just a measure of how much water in a given substance is actually available to support microbial growth. Most bacteria and molds, they need a water activity level of at least 0.75 to survive. Honey sits way down at 0.6. That is entirely too low to support any microbial growth. So any bacteria that gets into the honey, it's instantly dehydrated and destroyed.
But the bees don't stop at just dehydrating the nectar. As they process it, the bees' own stomach enzymes break down the sugars to produce gluconic acid. This drops the pH to a highly acidic level of about 4, which shuts down bacterial growth even further. And get this, as a byproduct of creating that acid, the enzymes also produce hydrogen peroxide, like literally a natural antiseptic. So the ancient magic that protected King Tut's eternal honey was in reality just incredibly advanced natural chemistry orchestrated by bees.
I want to leave you with this final thought today. We've seen how honey shaped the spiritual and royal worlds of antiquity, guiding souls, securing kings, and sweetening the wrath of angry gods. But when we look at the science, we realize that the magic wasn't just some myth, it was profoundly real. Because if bees figured out the chemical recipe for immortality millions of years before humans even walked the earth, well, we clearly still have so much left to learn.